At 16, they kick you out with a trash bag of your life and a phone number for a shelter. At 18, they hand you an envelope and tell you you're on your own. What I found in that envelope wasn't a check or a final goodbye, but a $9 deed to a forgotten piece of land and a metal building that looked more like a tomb than a home. What I built there would save my life. If you've ever been told you were on your own, if you've ever had to build a future from the dust of your past, then this story is for you. Because we're a community of people who know what it's like to start from nothing. The bus seat was cracked vinyl, cold even through my thin jeans. Every bump and lurch of the engine seemed to rattle the flimsy paper in my hand, the one that had been handed to me by Ms. Albright on my 18th birthday. It wasn't a card. It was a final notice from some rural county I'd never heard of. Delinquent property taxes. A plot of land with a single structure listed as a utility building. The name on the deed was my grandfather's, a man I only knew from a single faded photograph where he looked permanently squinted against the sun. He'd been gone for years, a ghost in a family of ghosts. 2 years of foster care, 2 years of group homes, and this was the inheritance I didn't know I had. A debt. "You're an adult now, Leo," Ms. Albright had said, her voice a mixture of practiced sympathy and bureaucratic exhaustion. "The estate, what little there is of it, is yours. You can pay the back taxes and the lien, or you can let the county seize it. It's your choice." Choice. That was a funny word for it. It felt less like a choice and more like a final door slamming shut. The bus wheezed to a stop in front of a squat brick building with a flagpole out front, the flag hanging limp in the humid air. This was it, the county seat. The town was little more than a wide spot in the road, a collection of tired storefronts and houses with peeling paint. I stepped off the bus, and the heat hit me like a physical weight. The air smelled of damp earth and something vaguely industrial, like old oil. I clutched the strap of my backpack, the sum total of my worldly possessions pressing into my shoulder. The county clerk's office was an exercise in beige. Beige walls, beige linoleum floors, beige metal desks. The woman behind the counter had hair the color of weak tea and glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked up at me over the rims, her expression unreadable. "Can I help you?" Her voice was flat, bored. I slid the crumpled notice across the counter. "I'm here about this. Leo Vance." She took the paper, her painted fingernails tapping on the formica. She typed my name into an ancient-looking computer that hummed ominously. The screen glowed a sickly green. "Vance, Lot 74B, 2.3 acres, structure on-site. Taxes are 3 years in arrears. Total with penalties comes to $9.42. I blinked. $9? I'd been expecting hundreds, maybe thousands, a sum as impossible as 1,000,000. "That's what it says." She swiveled the monitor toward me. The green text swam in my vision. "It's on the old agricultural deferment plan. Your grandfather filed the paperwork years ago. As long as it wasn't developed for commercial use, the tax rate was next to nothing. He paid the initial filing, but nothing since." She paused. "You want to settle it or surrender the deed?" I fumbled in my pocket for the worn $20 bill I had left. It was supposed to be my food for the next few days. I want to settle it." The words felt strange in my mouth, heavy with a significance I didn't understand. Why was I doing this? It was a piece of land I'd never seen, left by a man I'd never known. It was probably a worthless patch of weeds and a shed full of spiders. The smart thing to do would be to walk away. But walking away was all I'd ever done. Or, more accurately, it was what had always been done to me. This felt different. It was a string, however thin, connecting me to a past I didn't have. She took my 20, her movements slow and deliberate. She made change from a metal cash box, the coins clinking with finality. She stamped a form with a heavy, satisfying thud. "All right, son, it's yours. Deed is clear." She pushed a piece of paper toward me. It was a copy of the deed, my name now typed at the bottom. "Now you understand what you've got here?" "Not really," I admitted. She leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly. "That land is out on the old service road. Hasn't had county water or power run to it in decades. The structure is a Quonset hut. Military surplus from the 50s, most likely. People bought 'em up after the war for storage. It's not zoned for residential. You can't legally live there." She gave me a long, searching look. "You got somewhere else to go?" The question hung in the air, thick and uncomfortable. It was the same question every social worker, every foster parent, every well-meaning stranger had asked me for years. And I always had the same answer: "I'm figuring it out." She nodded slowly, a flicker of something, pity maybe, or just resignation, in her eyes. "There's a bus that goes out that way once a day, leaves at 4, stops at the crossroads about a mile from your property." She pushed my change and the deed back across the counter. "Good luck, son." I walked out of the beige office and back into the oppressive heat, the stamped paper clutched in my hand. It felt impossibly light and impossibly heavy all at once. For the price of 2 fast food meals, I had bought myself a past. A 2.3-acre patch of dirt with a metal shed on it. A place I couldn't legally live, with no water and no power. It was the stupidest, most reckless thing I had ever done. And it was the only thing that felt like mine. I had 3 hours until the bus left. I found a small park with a single bench under a tired-looking oak tree and sat down to wait. The deed lay in my lap, a map to a future that was a complete and terrifying blank. I stared at my grandfather's name, William Vance, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was falling. I felt like I had just landed. The bus driver grunted when I told him my stop. "Crossroads at Route 12? Ain't nothing out there but dirt and disappointment, kid." He was probably right. The bus rattled along progressively smaller roads, the tired houses giving way to overgrown fields and thick stands of pine. The other passengers got off one by one until it was just me, the driver, and the rhythmic squeak of the suspension. When he finally pulled over, it was at an intersection marked only by a leaning stop sign. "This is you," he said, not bothering to turn around. The doors hissed open, and I stepped out into a wall of sound, the buzz of insects, the rustle of leaves, the distant caw of a crow. The bus pulled away, leaving a cloud of diesel smoke and a profound silence in its wake. I was utterly, completely alone. I checked the hand-drawn map the clerk had given me. A mile down the gravel road. I adjusted my backpack and started walking. The gravel crunched under my worn sneakers. The trees on either side of the road formed a dense green tunnel, the sunlight dappling the ground in shifting patterns. It was beautiful, in a wild, untamed way that made the city feel like a different planet. But it was also unnerving. Every snap of a twig in the undergrowth made me jump. I felt like an intruder, a foreign object in a world that had its own rules and rhythms. After what felt like an eternity, the road opened up, and I saw it. Set back from the road, half swallowed by overgrown grass and creeping vines, was a long, curved metal structure, a Quonset hut. It was bigger than I had imagined, a giant silver archway of corrugated steel, rusted in patches to a deep, angry orange. It looked like a beached whale, ancient and alien. A single dirt track, barely visible, led from the road to a large sliding door on the front. This was it. Lot 74B, my inheritance, my $9 home. My heart sank. The clerk's warning echoed in my head. Not zoned for residential. It looked barely zoned for existence. The grass was waist-high, dotted with wildflowers and thorny bushes. The hut itself seemed to be sagging slightly on one side, as if tired of holding itself up. A wave of despair washed over me, so strong it almost buckled my knees. What had I done? This wasn't a fresh start, it was a dead end. I had traded the last of my money for a pile of rust in the middle of nowhere. For a long moment, I just stood there at the edge of the property, the gravel road behind me, this monument to failure in front of me. I could turn back. I could walk the mile to the crossroads, wait for the next bus tomorrow, and go where? Back to the city, to a shelter, to the same cycle of uncertainty and instability. Or I could walk up that dirt track. I could see what was inside. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of pollen and damp soil. One step, then another. I pushed through the tall grass, my jeans getting soaked with dew. The closer I got, the more intimidating the hut became. It was a fortress of neglect. The main door was a huge, sliding panel of steel, held shut by a thick chain and a heavy, rusted padlock. There was no way I was getting through that. I walked the perimeter, my hand trailing against the cool, rough metal. The sides were windowless. Around the back, however, I found a smaller, standard-sized door, its wooden frame rotting, its metal surface dented. It had a simple latch, but it was rusted solid. This was the first test. Give up or find a way. I looked around, my eyes scanning the tree line. I found a fallen branch, thick and heavy. Using it as a lever, I jammed it between the door and the frame and pushed. Nothing. I pushed again, putting my entire body weight into it. The wood groaned in protest. The metal shrieked. With a final desperate shove, the rusted latch gave way with a deafening crack. The door swung inward into darkness. The air that billowed out was stale and cool, smelling of dust, mice, and something else, something faintly metallic and earthy. It was the smell of a place that had been sealed for a very long time. I stood at the threshold, my heart pounding. The inside was a vast, cavernous space, the curved ceiling arching high above me. The only light came from the open doorway and a few grimy skylights in the roof, casting long, dusty beams through the gloom. The floor was concrete, cracked and uneven. The space was mostly empty, which was both a relief and a disappointment. In the center sat a long, sturdy wooden workbench, its surface littered with old tools, jars of screws and nails, and a thick layer of dust snaking up toward the ceiling. And that snaking up toward the ceiling. And that was it. No furniture, no signs that anyone had lived here, just the remnants of a workshop. It was better than I expected. It was worse than I had hoped. It was dry, at least, and it was big. The sheer volume of the space was overwhelming. It felt less like a building and more like a captured piece of the sky. I walked to the center of the hut, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I ran a hand over the workbench, leaving a clean streak in the thick dust. My grandfather's workbench. He had stood here, in this exact spot. He had worked with these tools. It was the first tangible connection I'd ever had to him. I started with the shelves. Tucked underneath a folded canvas tarp. I tucked underneath a folded canvas tarp. I found something else. It was a heavy military green metal box, like an old ammunition can. It was closed with two tight latches and a small loop for a padlock, but there was no lock on it. My fingers trembled slightly as I carried it over to the workbench and set it down in a beam of light. It felt important, significant. I wiped the dust from the lid with my sleeve. There were no markings on it. I hesitated for a moment, a strange mix of hope and fear churning in my stomach. What if it was empty? What if it was just more junk? I took a breath and flipped the latches. They sprang open with a sharp metallic click. I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of yellowed foam, were three things. The first was a thick stack of cash, wrapped in a rubber band. It was all 20s. I pulled it out, my hands shaking. I'd never held so much money in my life. I didn't count it then, but it looked like thousands. My mind reeled. Why would this be here? Why would he leave it? The second item was a large, sealed manila envelope with a single word written on the front in heavy black marker. L-E-O. My name. The third was a collection of small, leather-bound books, their covers faded and worn. They looked like journals or field guides. I pushed the money and the books aside and picked up the envelope. It was thick, heavy. I tore it open carefully. Inside were several pages of paper, folded together. The paper was crisp, high quality, not like the cheap notebook paper I was used to. It was a letter. The handwriting was neat, precise, the ink a faded blue. It began, "My dearest Leo." I had to sit down. I sank onto the dusty concrete floor, my back against the leg of the workbench, and I began to read the words of the grandfather I had never met. The story he told wasn't the one I had constructed in my head, the simple, sad story of abandonment. It was far more complicated and far more painful. He wrote about my mother, his daughter, and her struggles with addiction. He wrote about my father, a violent man who was deep in debt to dangerous people. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been trying to save me. "When you were born," he wrote, "I thought you were the second chance our family needed. But your father's world was closing in. They came looking for him, Leo. Not good people. I knew if they found him, they would find you and your mother. I had a little money saved, for my army pension and a lifetime of odd jobs. It wasn't much. I gave it all to your mother and told her to run, to take you somewhere safe, and never look back. I stayed behind to sell the house, to create a diversion, to make them think I was the one with the money." My eyes blurred with tears. I had to stop reading, to wipe them away with the back of my hand. The story I'd always been told was that my mother had just left, and my grandfather had disappeared. No one ever told me why. "It didn't work out the way I planned," the letter continued. "They found me anyway. They didn't believe the house was all I had. They took what little I got from the sale and made it clear they would be watching me. I couldn't risk contacting your mother. I couldn't risk leading them to you. So I disappeared. I bought this piece of land, this forgotten metal shell, under a different name at first, and paid for it in cash. I lived off the grid, taking cash jobs in town when I could, staying invisible. I heard, years later, that your mother had lost her fight, and I heard that you had ended up in the system. It broke my heart, son. It broke me in a way those men never could. I wanted to come for you more than anything, but I knew they were still out there. Their kind of debt doesn't just go away, and I couldn't bear the thought of them finding you through me. He explained that he had spent his last years here, in this hut, slowly preparing it. Not for himself, but for me. He knew he was getting sick. He knew he didn't have much time. This place, this box, this letter, it was his last desperate act of love. A message in a bottle set adrift on the sea of time, hoping it would one day find its way to me. The money in this box isn't a fortune, he wrote. It's about $5,000. It's every spare cent I managed to scrape together over 10 years. It's not enough to buy you a new life, but maybe, just maybe, it's enough to help you build one. Don't let them take this land, Leo. It's not much, but it's clean. No one is looking for it. No one knows it's connected to our family. It's a place you can be safe. Then he wrote about the hut itself, and about the small, leather-bound books in the box. Living out here taught me a lot. It taught me how to be self-sufficient, how to survive. Those books are my notes, my research. I had a dream for this place. I wanted to turn this metal box into a garden, a self-sustaining ecosystem. It's a concept called aquaponics. You raise fish, and their waste provides nutrients for plants, and the plants filter the water for the fish. It's a closed loop, a perfect little world. You can grow food year-round, with no soil, using very little water. It's a crazy idea, I know. But in a crazy world, sometimes the crazy ideas are the only ones that make sense. The plans are in the books, everything I learned. Maybe it's just an old man's foolish dream, but I'm leaving it for you. The money, the land, and the dream. The letter ended with a line that shattered the last of my composure. I'm sorry I couldn't be the grandfather you deserved, Leo, but I hope you know that every day I was alive, I was thinking of you. I loved you from the moment I first held you. Don't ever forget that. Your life is your own now. Make it a good one. Love, Grandpa William. I sat there on the cold concrete floor for a long time, the letter in my hands, tears streaming down my face. I cried for the grandfather I never knew. I cried for the mother I barely remembered. I cried for the scared, lonely kid I had been for so long. But for the first time, I also cried with a sense of release. The weight of being unwanted, of being thrown away, lifted. I hadn't been abandoned. I had been protected. This wasn't a tomb. It was a sanctuary, an inheritance not of debt, but of love and a strange, beautiful, crazy dream. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the open door. The world outside was getting dark, but inside this rusty metal shell, a small, determined light had just been switched on. That night, I slept on the floor of the Quonset hut, wrapped in the canvas tarp from the box, my backpack for a pillow. The $5,000 and the letter were tucked safely inside my shirt. The sleep was dreamless and deep, the first truly peaceful rest I'd had in years. I woke to the sound of birds and the sight of sunlight streaming through the grimy skylights. The air was cool and crisp. For the first time, I wasn't waking up in a place that belonged to someone else. I was home. The next few days were a blur of assessment and planning. The first priority was making the place livable. The money felt like a sacred trust, and I was determined not to waste a penny of it. I walked the mile to the crossroads and caught the morning bus back into town. It felt different this time. I wasn't a lost kid anymore. I was a man with a purpose. a landowner. It sounded ridiculous, but the thought made me stand a little straighter. My first stop was the hardware store. I bought a heavy-duty broom, a bucket, cleaning supplies, a new padlock for the main door, and a solar-powered lantern. Then I went to the small grocery store and stocked up on non-perishables. Canned beans, rice, peanut butter, things that would last. The biggest challenge was water. The clerk had been right. There was no county water. I found a section of old guttering behind the hut, and with some sealant, rainwater into a large plastic trash can I'd bought. It wasn't elegant, but it was a start. Washed the skylights, letting in twice as much light. With every stroke of the broom, with every bucket of dirty water I tossed outside, I felt like I was clearing out the cobwebs in my own mind, making space for something new. Once the place was clean, I had to confront the bigger problem. I was living there illegally. I couldn't stay hidden forever. I went to the town's small public library and spent a whole day on their computers, researching zoning laws, building codes, and agricultural exemptions. It was a dizzying world of legal jargon, but I slowly pieced things together. The property was zoned agricultural transitional. I couldn't build a house, but I could legally operate a farm or an agricultural experiment. An agricultural experiment. My grandfather's words came back to me. Aquaponics, a self-sustaining ecosystem, was a crazy idea. But it was also my only legal justification for being there. If I was actively farming, I wasn't just a squatter. I was a resident engaged in agricultural activity. It was a loophole, a sliver of a chance, but it was enough. That evening, back in the quiet solitude of the hut, I opened my grandfather's journals. The leather was soft and worn. Inside, the pages were filled with his neat, precise handwriting, just like the letter. But these weren't just words. They were filled with diagrams, calculations, and detailed drawings. He had spent years planning this. He designed a system specifically for the Quonset hut. He'd researched fish species that were hardy and fast-growing. He'd tested native plants to see which ones would thrive. It wasn't just a dream, it was a blueprint. He had designed a vertical system, using the height of the hut to maximize growing space. The plans showed large tanks for the fish at the bottom, with a pump. He'd noted a low-wattage solar pump would be ideal to move the nutrient-rich water up to a series of stacked grow beds made from PVC pipes and food-grade plastic barrels. He had lists of materials, most of which he specified could be found second-hand or salvaged. He had a planting schedule, a feeding guide for the fish, troubleshooting tips. It was a complete instruction manual for survival. This was the moment of my real choice. The money could have been a bus ticket to anywhere, a down payment on a cheap apartment in some city, a chance to start a normal life. But looking at my grandfather's meticulous plans, I knew I couldn't leave. This project was more than just a legal loophole. It was my legacy. It was the last piece of him I had. I decided right then I was going to build it. I was going to make his crazy dream a reality. Have you ever been at a crossroads like that? A moment where you have to choose between the easy path and the one that feels right, even if it's 100 times harder. That's a moment that defines you. For anyone watching who has faced that choice, I want you to know you're not alone. This community is here to listen, and I promise you, I read every single one, because these are the stories that matter. Now, back to the hut. The first step was sourcing the materials. I became a master scrounger. I spent days visiting junkyards, salvage depots, and the local dump. I found old IBC totes, the big square plastic tanks used for transporting liquids, which would be perfect for the fish. I got them for a few dollars each after a thorough cleaning. I found discarded PVC pipes behind a construction site. I bought a used solar panel and a deep cycle battery from a guy who was upgrading his RV. Every piece I acquired felt like a victory. Building the system was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I wasn't a builder or a plumber or a farmer. I was a kid who had barely passed high school shop class. I made countless mistakes. I cut pipes to the wrong length. I struggled to make the connections watertight. There were days of pure frustration where I wanted to throw my tools against the wall and give up. The hut was either freezing cold in the mornings or stiflingly hot in the afternoons. I was constantly hungry, tired, and covered in grime. But every time I felt like quitting, I would pull out my grandfather's journals. I would read his words of encouragement, study his careful diagrams. It felt like he was there with me, a quiet, steady presence guiding my hands. He had anticipated the problems I would face. "Don't over-tighten the PVC fittings," he wrote. "The threads will strip. Snug is good enough. And when you test the pump for the first time, be prepared for leaks. Have sealant and rags ready." He was right every time. Slowly, painstakingly, the system began to take shape. I built the wooden framework to hold the grow beds, stacking them 4 high along the sunniest wall of the hut. I cut the IBC totes in half to create 2 large fish tanks. I ran the plumbing, connecting the tanks to the pump and the pump to the grow beds. The day I finally hooked up the solar panel to the battery and the pump and flipped the switch, my heart was in my throat. There was a hum, a gurgle, and then, miraculously, water started flowing. It moved from the fish tanks up the pipes and trickled down through the grow beds before returning to the tanks, clean and clear. It was working. The heart of my ecosystem was beating. The next step was the living components, fish and plants. I used some of the money to order 100 tilapia fingerlings online. They arrived in a plastic bag of water, tiny and silver. Releasing them into the big tanks felt like a sacred act. These little creatures were going to be my partners in survival. For the plants, I started with seeds: lettuce, kale, spinach, herbs, things my grandfather recommended as fast-growing and nutrient-hungry. I filled the grow beds with clay pellets, an inert medium that would support the roots, and carefully planted the seeds. And then, I waited. This was a new kind of challenge: patience. For the first week, nothing happened. I checked the beds every hour, a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Had I done it all wrong? Was the water chemistry off? Were the seeds bad? I started to doubt everything. But then, on the 8th day, I saw it. A tiny speck of green pushing its way up through the clay pellets. Then another, and another. Within a few days, the beds were covered in a faint green fuzz of new life. I had never felt a sense of accomplishment like that in my entire life. I had created this. From rust and junk and a dead man's dream, I had coaxed life into being. The weeks that followed were a quiet routine of care and observation. I fed the fish every morning and evening. I monitored the water levels and the pH. I watched the plants grow with astonishing speed. The constant flow of nutrient-rich water was like a supercharger for them. The lettuce leaves grew broad and green. The kale became thick and curly. The smell of basil and mint started to fill the air in the hut. The fish grew too, their silver bodies darting through the water. My diet changed. I went from canned beans and rice to fresh salads every day. I learned to cook the kale, to use the fresh herbs to flavor my simple meals. The food I was eating was alive, vibrant, and I had grown it myself. It was the best food I had ever tasted. The first time I harvested a full-size tilapia from the tank, my hands were shaking. I thanked it for its life, a practice my grandfather had mentioned in his journals. I learned how to clean it and cook it on the small pot-bellied stove. That meal, a piece of fresh fish with a side of steamed kale, was a feast. It was the taste of independence, the taste of survival. As the system matured, it became more and more stable. The plants grew so thick they formed a living green wall inside the hut. The fish population was healthy and reproducing. I had more food than I could eat myself. I started taking the surplus into town. I set up a small table at the local farmers market. At first, people were skeptical. "What is this, space lettuce?" one old man joked. But they were curious. I explained the aquaponics system, how it used no pesticides, no herbicides, and 90% less water than traditional farming. They tried my produce, and they came back for more. My little stand became a regular feature at the market. I wasn't just the strange kid who lived in the rusty hut anymore. I was Leo, the aquaponics guy. I started to make a little money, enough to buy things I couldn't salvage, to improve my system, to make the hut more comfortable. I bought a small generator for backup power. I installed a proper wood stove for the winter. I even built myself a bed frame out of scrap lumber. One day, the woman from the county clerk's office stopped by my table. It was the same woman with the tea-colored hair and the glasses on a chain. She looked at my piles of vibrant green lettuce and deep purple kale, her expression unreadable as always. "I remember you," she said, her voice still flat. "You're the boy who bought the old Vance place." "That's me," I said, my heart skipping a beat. I was still terrified that someone from the county would shut me down. She picked up a head of lettuce, examining it closely. "Heard you were doing something out there. Didn't figure you'd last the first winter." "It's been a lot of work," I said carefully. "This is agricultural activity," she stated, not a question. "Yes, ma'am. An experimental aquaponics farm." She nodded slowly, a long, thoughtful silence stretching between us. I held my breath. Finally, she put the lettuce down and reached into her purse. She pulled out a few dollars. "I'll take 2 of these," she said, "and a bunch of that kale." As I bagged her produce, she looked me straight in the eye. "Your grandfather, William," she said, her voice a little softer now. "He used to come into the office sometimes, a quiet man. Always seemed like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders." She paused. "He'd be proud of you." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, a lump forming in my throat. She took her bag and walked away without another word. I never saw her at the market again, but I knew in that moment that I was going to be okay. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was building. I was a part of this small community in my own strange way. The Quonset hut was no longer just a shelter. It was a living, breathing thing. The hum of the pump was its heartbeat. The green wall of plants were its lungs. It was a self-contained world that I had built with my own 2 hands, guided by the ghost of a man I had come to love. Life found a rhythm. The seasons turned. Winter came, and the snow piled up outside the hut. But inside, my garden flourished under grow lights powered by my solar panels. The warmth from the wood stove kept the fish tanks from freezing. I was eating fresh greens in the dead of winter, a small miracle of my own making. Spring came, and the world outside woke up, but my world had never been asleep. I spent the next couple of years refining and expanding. I added a second system for growing fruits, strawberries and tomatoes, which thrived in the nutrient-rich environment. I started raising chickens in a small coop outside. their eggs adding another layer to my self-sufficiency. The money I made at the market was enough to live on, simply but comfortably. I even managed to save a little. I never forgot the reason I was there. I would often reread my grandfather's letter, his words a constant reminder of the sacrifice he had made. I felt his presence in the quiet hum of the hut, in the rustle of the leaves, in the taste of the food he had taught me how to grow. This place wasn't just my home, it was his memorial. It was proof that his life, his struggle, had not been in vain. One afternoon, a shiny black car pulled up the dirt track. It was the first vehicle other than my own beat-up truck, bought with market money, that had ever come down my lane. A man in a suit got out. He looked uncomfortable, his expensive shoes sinking into the soft dirt. My heart hammered in my chest. Old fears, the ones my grandfather wrote about, resurfaced. He introduced himself as a representative for a development corporation. They were buying up land in the area for a new suburban housing project. He had a briefcase full of paperwork and an offer, a very generous offer. More money than I had ever dreamed of. Enough to leave this place behind and start over anywhere I wanted, in style. "It's a great offer, Mr. Vance," he said, his smile slick and practiced. "You're sitting on a prime piece of real estate. We'll clear the lot, take care of this structure. You can walk away with a clean slate." He saw a rusty shed on a patch of weeds. He didn't see the years of work, the sweat, the tears. He didn't see the thriving ecosystem inside. He didn't see a memorial to a man who had given everything to protect his family. He just saw a number on a spreadsheet. I thought about it for a minute. I thought about what that money could buy. An apartment with running water that didn't come from a rain barrel. A life where I didn't have to fix a leaky pipe or patch a hole in the roof. The easy path. Then I looked back at the Quonset hut, my home. I thought of my grandfather. He had bought this land to keep me safe, to give me a place that couldn't be taken away. Selling it would be like selling his memory. It would be a betrayal of everything he had done. "Thank you for the offer," I said, my voice steady. "But it's not for sale." The man's smile faltered. "I don't think you understand. This is a very significant—" "I understand perfectly," I cut him off, my tone polite but firm. "This land has been in my family for a long time. It means more to me than money." He tried to argue, to persuade, to dangle bigger numbers in front of me. But my mind was made up. This was my choice, the same kind of choice my grandfather had made all those years ago. To choose the harder path, the path of principle, over the easy one. He had chosen to protect me. I was choosing to protect his legacy. Eventually, the man in the suit left, his car kicking up dust as it sped away down the track. I stood there for a long time, watching until he was gone. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable certainty. I knew who I was. I was Leo Vance, the boy who had built a life out of nothing. I was the keeper of my grandfather's dream. I was home. And that's the story of how a $9 deed to a pile of rust changed my life. It taught me that home isn't something you're given, it's something you build. It taught me that inheritance isn't about money. It's about the stories and the dreams that are passed down to us. My grandfather left me more than just a piece of land. He left me a blueprint for resilience. He taught me how to grow, not just plants, but a future. Today, the aquaponics system is bigger than ever. I have a small but steady business selling produce to local restaurants. I've even started teaching workshops, helping other people learn how to build their own systems, how to become a little more self-sufficient. The Quonset hut, once a symbol of abandonment and despair, is now a place of life, growth, and community. It's a testament to the idea that even in the most barren ground, something beautiful can take root. This journey wasn't easy. There were 1,000 moments when I could have, and maybe should have, given up. But I didn't. And if you're watching this, and you're in your own dark place, feeling like you've been left with nothing but a pile of rust, I want you to hear this. You are stronger than you think. You have the capacity to build, to create, to grow. Your life is your own. Make it a good one. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please consider subscribing to stories of survival, of resilience, of finding light in the dark. And please, what have you built from the ground up? What dream has kept you going? I'll be reading as always, because every story matters. Every one of us is